We also want to note that while some of our panelists and even myself have ties to academic institutions, we want to be clear that this event is not affiliated with those institutions. This event is organized in collaboration with Boston Liberation Health. For those of you unfamiliar, Boston Liberation Health, BLH, is a communal space created by and for those who are dedicated to advocating for social justice and liberation here in Boston and around the world. As a group, they strive to learn and practice liberation health theories and methodologies to ground our work for a society that prioritizes human needs over profit. And to learn more about Boston Liberation Health, we encourage you to visit their website, which I will put in the chat. Okay. Now, before I introduce the panelists, we just want to give a brief overview about what brings us to tonight. So over a month ago, Hamas launched an attack against Israel, resulting in mass casualties and the kidnapping of Israeli people. This attack has led to an escalated and ongoing attack by the Israeli government on Gaza and increasingly in the West Bank. Our focus tonight on the unfolding genocide in Gaza in no way endorses the actions of Hamas, nor delegitimizes the real concerns people have about anti-Semitism and the violence against Jewish people around the world today. Rather, we are organizing this teach-in as a reflection of our understanding of the magnitude of the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza at this moment, which only builds on a long history of state-sanctioned violence and oppression. By discussing the ongoing violence occurring in Gaza and the West Bank, we also want to bring attention to the United States' complicity in fueling anti-Palestinian and Arab rhetoric, which only serves to foster Islamophobia, increase surveillance and criminalization, and the erasure of the experiences of Palestinian people. To bring about true safety for all in the region, we must address the root causes of the current violence, which include occupation and apartheid, while also demanding for a ceasefire to end the genocide occurring in Gaza and to end the apartheid system that has allowed for systemized land seizures, routine airstrikes, arbitrary detentions, military checkpoints, enforced family separations, and targeted killings within occupied Palestinian territories prior to the events that have occurred over the past few weeks. While our social work organizations and educational spaces have largely been silent, as social workers living and working in the United States, we must recognize the collective responsibility we have as a profession to demand our government stop the funding, collaboration, and supporting of Israel's military response. In the years following the murder of George Floyd, social work has professed to be working towards anti-racism and social justice. And if it is true, we must ask ourselves why Palestine is so often seen as the exception to our commitment to social justice. It is our belief as organizers of this teach-in that health, justice, and peace for all in the region cannot be achieved without more political educations and the emergence of a strong international solidarity movement. Additionally, as we join here tonight to learn more about Israel and Palestine, we should also be equally concerned with other issues such as Cop City in Atlanta, the genocide occurring in Sudan, as well as the ongoing humanitarian crises occurring in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Haiti. These other crises demonstrate how interconnected our world is and the varied ways oppression materializes and is reproduced. With all that being said, it is important to acknowledge that this one teach-in will not answer all of the questions folks have about the history or current events occurring in Israel and Palestine. We are fortunate that this week alone, other groups like Social Workers for Palestine, the Upend Movement, and the Network to Advance Abolitionist Social Work have hosted power hours and other teach-ins, and we hope that there will be other political education spaces that emerge as we recognize that there is a need for additional educational and strategy spaces specifically for social workers. Given the limited time tonight, our focus is on 3 items: helping people understand the relevant history in Palestine, helping people understand the current health and mental health conditions on the ground in Palestine, and helping people understand the role of social work and liberation health in the movement for justice in Palestine. To help guide our conversation, we have 3 amazing panelists who will share their opinions and expertise around these 3 goals. I'll first introduce Dr. Leila Farsakh. She's a professor of political science at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. She's the editor of Rethinking Statehood in Palestine, Self-Determination and Decolonization Beyond Partition, and co-editor of the Arab-Jewish Questions, Geographies of Engagement in Palestine and Beyond. She has published widely on the political economy of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and alternative to partition in Israel-Palestine in various academic journals and other venues, including the London Review of Books, Le Monde Diplomatique, Al-Shabaka, Jadalia, The New Arab, and others. Dr. Wahab, Stéphanie Wahab, is a professor of Portland State University School of Social Work and honorary research associate professor at the University of Otago, Social and Community Work in New Zealand. She teaches courses focused on social justice, philosophies of science, qualitative inquiry, and the sex trades. Her research and scholarship are concerned with the intersections of individual and state-sanctioned violence, including but not limited to intimate partner violence, systemic racism, criminalization and occupation. Her collaborative research and activism for Palestinian liberation are rooted in Palestinian feminist and anti-colonial epistemologies, which sustains her work in this moment. Zack Osheroff Lambert is a communist anti-racist activist and father of three. He's a liberation health social worker with over 10 years of experience working with multi-stressed children and families in Boston. He has served on the Boston Liberation Health Steering Committee since its inception and is a founding signatory of the Boston Liberation Health Charter. He is an author of the collection Social Justice in Clinical Practice, a Liberation Health Framework for Social Work, and his political writings have also appeared in Descendant Voice magazine. As mentioned before, we will leave time at the end of this panel for Q&A with questions that were again submitted during registration and are placed throughout the chat, or placed in the chat throughout the panel. To begin, I'm going to ask Dr. Farsakh to explain the history of Palestine for us.
Thank you very much, Greer, for inviting me, and thank you for the panelists who are with me today, and for introducing me to Boston Liberation Health. Your work is very important, and I am a big believer in social worker and therapist and psychiatrist, psychologist. We are at a moment right now where this is very much needed because you're people who understand trauma, you understand violence, and you understand also how violence, when it is internalized, can only produce more violence. And how to cut that circle of violence being reproduced is something very important and something possible. So I thank you very much. I feel very honored to be among you. Thank you for your incredible work, and thank you for all this audience. I'm impressed that there's so many people who want to know more about how did we come here and how can we get out of here. And again, I cannot stress enough how much your role is so important to emphasize the humanity of everybody. And it's also a particularly hard moment today because everybody is scared and the security of everybody has been shaken to the core, not just safety of their life, but also their identity. Many people are particularly petrified because their identity and how they see themselves, especially the perpetrators, has been shaken and is being shaken. And how to move from this, take this opportunity, this horrible moment, to try and understand why we got there and how we can get out of it is something very important. Now, as to why are we here and how do we understand this moment? As you nicely explained, we are at this war which started on the 7th of October with Hamas surprise and brutal attack that killed 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilian, and injured 2,600 people. This attack was launched by Hamas in retaliation against the war that Israel has inflicted on the Palestinians since 1948 and the apartheid structure of domination it has imposed since. As many of you might know, there are 2.2 million people living in Gaza, 70% of whom are descendants of the Palestinians who were expelled from their home when Israel was created in 1948. These 2.2 million Palestinians have lived under siege since Israel redeployed from the Gaza Strip in 2005 and Hamas came to power in 2006. Since 2006, i.e. for the past 17 years, the inhabitants of the Gaza Strips have been living in the largest open-air prison in the world, as according to a number of human rights organizations. These people have been deprived of access to the outside world, not allowed to have electricity for more than 12 hours a day, experiencing poverty rate that reached 80% of the population and unemployment level of 47%. Again, this is before the 7th of October. This population of Gaza has also lived 4 wars before this one, in 2008, 2014, 2014, and 2021, that destroyed houses, infrastructures, water, and electricity facilities, and led to the death of 6,300 people. In other words, between 2006 and 2023, September 2003, 6,300 Palestinians have been killed in those wars I just mentioned, and 300 Israelis. Israel has tried to reduce the problem of Gaza into a humanitarian crisis one we are seeing today of magnified proportions, rather than as a political problem, wanted to make it focus on alleviating the human suffering of, or not, of Palestinians, rather than it being about Palestinian right to self-determination, freedom, and end of occupation, and equality and return. The question that is being asked today is why Hamas provoked this war now, at this particular juncture. The answer is multifolded, but I will focus on three main causes. I will look in particular at what are the local, regional, and international factors that led to this attack and this war. First, the local context. Hamas's attack and the war that has been unleashed need to be understood as a response to the failure of the peace process, a peace process that started 30 years ago, and it failed to bring safety to the Palestinians, let alone end the conflict with Israel. It happened into 2023 on the heel of one of the bloodiest years for the Palestinians. Between January 2023 and September 2023, 260 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank by Israeli settlers who have been violent, unrestrained in their violence against the Palestinians. The peace process that many people thought would bring a two-state solution, as the international community adopted it in 2003, have seen their land being expropriated and has seen the doubling of the settler population to over 750,000 people. I would like to show you now some maps, some basic information to show you. This is the map of the West Bank in 1999. It's a map that shows you how Israel was still in control of all the land of Palestine, including the West Bank and Gaza. And in the West Bank in particular, all these white areas is the area that Israel continues to control. Israel also expanded settlements and settler population to unprecedented proportions. This graph shows you the number of settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem from 1972 to 2021. If you look at this map, you see that between 1972 and 1982, there was only, and still wrong, 210,000 settlers. Settlers, according to international law, are illegal. They cannot be moved into the West Bank. When the peace process was signed in 1993 between the PLO and the Israeli government, it did not mention the issue of settlements, but it was understood that Palestinians could get a state, and the presence of settlers would prevent such a state. Between 1992, if you see here, and 2021, in other words, over the past 30 years, we have the tripling of the settler population from 210,000 to 730,000. In other words, we have Israel moved 500,000 settlers into the West Bank during the peace process, and they are distributed all over the West Bank. This map shows you all the blue spots represent the 130 settlements. They were built on Palestinian land, and they are the one that host today the 730,000 settlers. Israel has also went ahead and started building the separation barrier. It did not build it on the Green Line or the border of the 1967 war, but built it within the West Bank. And once it is completed, and it is now completed, would absorb 10% of the West Bank into Israel. This has all happened since 2002. So not yesterday, not a year ago, it has happened, been built, and it's completed. Israel also tried to connect the settlements together, and it connect them together. As you see, this gray area connect how they trying to connect the settlements all towards Israel, and I'll explain in a minute, while keeping the border of the West Bank with Jordan under Israeli military control. These are the settlements that are along the Jordan Valley. In any future Palestinian state, it has been clearly said this will be a demilitarized state, and this will be under Israeli control. And if you see that, what happened then during the Oslo peace process, what happened is really the implementation and the deepening of an apartheid structure of domination, where Israeli settlers and the Israeli state have control over the land, And the Palestinians are cut into these brown areas. You see how fragmented they are, okay? Connected together by these red roads. These are the roads that Palestinians can use. While Israel also built these blue roads, which are the bypass roads. These are roads that connect the settlements with one another and with Israel. And you have these yellow spots. These are the checkpoints which are become further institutionalized and made like terminal that basically cut the West Bank into at least what I would call 10 main Bantustans or population reserves. In other words, areas where Palestinians are living, out of which they cannot get out without passing a checkpoint, these checkpoints, and needing a permit from the Israeli to get out of it. So we saw 30 years of peace process that led to the fragmentation of the Palestinian land, to the division and a loss of Palestinian control of their economy, of their land, and also a siege on the Gaza Strip imposed since 2006 after Israel's redeployment, which meant that Israel said it controls the airspace, the water, the access to the sea, and air space and land space of Gaza Strip. So the war that Hamas started was in retaliation to this structure, was in a way to say we have a right to life, we have a right to freedom, and our demands is not just to have more electricity or more water, our demands is to have more freedom. So the question then, these are, and also one is also to say that the Palestinian Authority does not, who is in control of the West Bank, is neither able to defend the Palestinians and neither is representative of Palestinian needs and demands. Now, at the regional level, why this attack happened now? And it happened now because of, I don't know if you heard about it, the normalization agreement between Israel and Arab countries. And right now there was a negotiation going on to normalize relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And this attack came to sabotage it as a way to emphasize to the Arab world and to authoritarian regimes that they cannot make peace with Israel without thinking of the Palestinians, that the Palestinians are still here, they have legitimate demands protected by international law, and Arab countries cannot just violate them as they please to go and make peace with Israel without at least lifting the siege on Gaza. As to the international reason why this war happened now, it has to do with the international hypocrisy of how much the world, and the US in particular, our government, is fully supportive of the Ukrainian struggle against Russian invasion and accepted Netanyahu's description of Gaza as being evil and that the Palestinian struggle is not as legitimate as the Ukrainian struggle against liberation from oppression. So this is, I don't want to take more because I want to hear from other words, but I think that is the larger picture. So basically this war, it was because many people fault Israel, Hamas, why did it do it now? And didn't know that it was going to be retaliation of such a massive scale and Israel will never. I think, I don't know what was the intention of Hamas, but what is clear, it was a way of saying enough is enough. The two-state solution was killed by Israel. What Israel peace process did not bring us peace, brought us more fragmentation, more oppression, and more dispossession. And it's a measure to say that this apartheid structure that Israel created is not only abusive to the Palestinians, it also cannot guarantee security to the Israelis. And the question now is, how do we go from this incredible impasse we are on, the incredible genocide we are seeing? Will violence lead to more violence, which is what Israel seems to be determined? But Israel is in a big conundrum as a state, because as I try to explain, in this land called from the river to the sea, there's only one sovereign state, which is Israel. The Palestinian, and this sovereign state called Israel has under its control 14 million people. 7 million of those are Israeli who have rights, citizen rights, equality, and even superiority. And another 7 million Palestinians being governed under different system of control, and different level of control and legal rights. You have 2 million inside Israel who are citizens of Israel. They are citizens, but they are discriminated against. You have the Palestinians in the West Bank, another 2.3 million, who have some autonomy but no sovereignty, like the autonomy of Bantustans. You have the Palestinians of East Jerusalem, 350,000. That people forget about them. They are residents of Israel, so they have a little bit more rights than those in the West Bank, but are no citizens of Israel, so no rights. And then you have those in the Gaza Strip, the 2.3 million people that have been under siege for the past 17 years. And basically, we are saying what Hamas was trying to say with this massive attack is that the Palestinian people are all unified in their struggle to assert their right to live in this land in peace with everybody else. I'll stop here, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Farsakh. Dr. Wahab, could you talk a little bit about how you see like the history that Dr. Farsakh is talking about and how it relates to social work and the current health and mental health conditions in Palestine?
Yes. First, thank you so much, Dr. Farsakh. I feel like that was a mic drop moment. I don't know that there's anything anyone could add to include extremely helpful context. Thank you so much for including those maps as well. I think those are incredibly useful to us. I guess for starters, hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with everybody today, despite the reasons for our coming together. I am joining you from the unceded ancestral territories of the Multnomah, the Cathlamet, the Clackamas, the Chinook, and the Molalla nations in Oregon. I want to thank, in particular, Dr. Hamilton, the entire Boston Liberation Health, and all the social workers and people behind the scenes who made this event happen. And I also want to thank you all because as a result of this collaboration, I've now become familiar with the Liberation Health model. And I just today sent an email to all my students in my social justice class. So I'm so happy to know of you and your work. I want to start by reading it was a post that Linda Sarsour, who is a Palestinian activist, what she noted. And I may be speaking for all the Palestinians here, as well as folks out in the community, but she wrote, I never thought I would ever be watching my own people's genocide through my smartphone. Every day as Palestinians, we consume horror committed against our people and watch those in power either stay silent or be complicit. So don't expect articulate, well-crafted words of political correctness. We are speaking through our rage and our tears. Give us space, give us grace. So I guess I'm asking for grace as I begin talking. So that we are gathering in service of liberation and healing makes me believe even more that Palestinian resistance, Palestine solidarity offers a promise of liberation for everyone. There are few issues, I believe, that test social work's stated values of social justice, of human dignity and worth, more than the ongoing occupation of Palestine. And as Dr. Farsakh mentioned, I think for many people in the West, in the US, there's this sense that the violence began on October 7th. And I really want to encourage all of us to consider the history that Dr. Farsakh just shared with us as a means of situating what we are witnessing and seeing within a long history. And I will add, a history of settler colonialism, and one that has apartheid as a particular technology of settler colonialism. I would also add that the violence that we are witnessing is not a religious one, despite many framings, but rather it's a war between colonizer and colonized. So I was asked to speak to a few things, kind of health and mental health conditions in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as social work, care or lack of care, but I'm just going to say care for Palestine and why social work should care. So let me just say a few things. There's so much to be said, but I'm happy to say more during question and answers later. In regards to the current health and mental health conditions, I mean, I believe we've probably all likely seen the very graphic physical, emotional, psychological suffering of people in Gaza. I personally have such complicated and unsettled feelings about how Americans are receiving news and information about the genocide, in particular, just the very graphic depictions of violence, of maiming, of murder. And it's kind of beside the point. And I think I'm just sharing my own internal struggle whenever I'm in a position of speaking to what is happening on the ground. And in part, I think part of that unsettling that I have around sharing facts and sharing information that I have about what conditions are like for folks is I feel like I am feeding into and playing into the sense that the suffering has to be so bad for, the Palestinian suffering has to be so bad for people to be moved to action. And so when I share some of the horrific information that I know, I feel like I'm playing into that a little bit. And at the same time, because of the kinds of coverage that we tend to get in US media and US news, I also think we don't get all the stories and all the important stories. So in terms of health conditions, again, I'm suspecting that people have heard, they have read things. In particular, what's been in the news quite a bit in the last few days is the situation with hospitals in Gaza right now. I don't, at this point, don't even know if Al-Shifa Hospital is still functioning. I was on a webinar this morning hosted by Dr. Lara Sheehy, a Palestinian US psychologist and professor, and then Dr. Youssef, who's a Palestinian psychiatrist from Gaza. And they were sharing that most of the hospitals have collapsed. The biggest one, Al-Shifa, has been infiltrated in the past few days by the IDF. They're in a complete blackout once again, so very little news is coming out. And there's a Dr. Ghassan Abu Setan. Some people may have heard him. He is on a lot of news networks and speaks a lot on Instagram, but he has been saying that for weeks now. He's a pediatric reconstructive surgeon. For weeks, he has been having to operate on children without anesthesia. A few weeks ago, he was using vinegar as an antibacterial, and now I think they've resorted to hand sanitizer. I did want to mention one important health, kind of mental health issue that I feel is not receiving much coverage, and really that is the gendered impacts of the genocide, particularly on girls and women in Gaza. I know that young women have had to take to sitting in the sea while they are menstruating because there are no sanitary pads or tampons due to the complete blockage of food, water, fuel, daily and medical supplies. I know women and girls have resorted to, I don't know if this is even still available, taking pills to delay their periods due to lack of material that people need. I have heard from colleagues that women giving birth who bleed have been having their uterus cut out as a means of stopping the bleeding because the medication isn't there to support people. I don't know how many people know that there were 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza at the time of the escalation. And doctors are performing C-sections without anesthesia. So for the impacts in terms of, violence and trauma, I think I can speak from experience that these forms of violence and horror and displacement have tremendous generational impacts. As the daughter myself, I'm a daughter of a Palestinian refugee from 1948. I can attest to the various ways that all of these horrors that we see now have significant consequences, even intergenerationally, in terms of interpersonal relationships, social relationships, parenting, mental health struggles. And what I am hearing now, and this was something that Dr. Youssef on this webinar spoke about this morning, was the necessity for all of us who care, and social workers, liberation social workers, I think, are definitely included in this, is that we need to start thinking about what happens the day after, and meaning the day after the ceasefire. How is the world, the caring world, going to respond to all of these needs? And maybe we can talk a little bit about that later. I also wanted to say that, I think the focus on trauma and suffering is very important, in part because things are just so unbelievably dire now. But I want to add, as Dr. Farsakh has mentioned, that the conditions for Palestinians have been horrific for a very, very long time, 75 years. I really want to stress that Palestinians, despite how we come to people's attention, are not, and I don't think should not be, defined by our suffering alone. We are beautiful, loving, resilient people. We have strong cultural traditions. We have a love for family, our land, for each other. And Palestinians are not the human savages, as are often referred to by Israeli officials. And I want to note that even in the face of all of this suffering, Palestinian sumud, which is an Arabic word, it's specifically a Palestinian term referring to steadfastness, can be seen and felt. Dr. Liane Murray defines sumud as a psychological act of defiance and willful self-determination, a healthy attachment to one's inner self and social world. I think that Palestinians demonstrate their sumud through refusal, a refusal around accepting colonial domination. We see sumud through the children that stare down IDF soldiers wearing machine guns who pat them down to go to school every day. We've seen it with political prisoners digging themselves out of a prison with spoons. We've seen it with medical providers refusing to leave their hospitals in northern Gaza because they won't abandon their patients. I think Palestinian sumud is our superpower. So let me just name, and I can come back to it later if people have questions, I think 4 or 5 points that I think are the reasons why social work should inherently care about not just Palestine, but the violence of the occupation and clearly the genocide now. One is that social work cares about violence. We care about individual level violence. We care about community violence. We also care about state sanctioned kinds of violence. And another reason is that social work cares about health and mental health of individuals and communities. And because of the Nakba, which refers to the catastrophe of 1948 that Dr. Farsakh referred to, the 700,000 Palestinians that were uprooted and displaced from their villages created the world's largest refugee population in the world. And there are many Palestinians in the United States. We are everywhere. And what happens in Palestine impacts all of us who are here in the US and in other places, and it impacts our health and impacts our mental health. 3, whether it's social work's focus on criminalization or mass incarceration or even abolition, social work is caring more and more about carcerality and carceral logics. And it's one reason why I loved the maps that Dr. Farsakh showed us, because it is such a profound and impactful visualization of, what often gets said about Gaza as the world's largest open air prison. And number, I think 4, a reason is that social work cares or claims to care about equity and justice. I don't know how many people here know about the nation state law of 2018 in Israel, but it states Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people, and they have an exclusive right to national self-determination in it, meaning that citizenship belongs to Jewish people only in Israel. And then social work claims to care about children. Not only have more than 6,300 children, I can't even believe those words are coming out of my mouth, Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza alone in the last month. But prior to October 7th, for decades, Israel has been maiming and killing children. And my good friend and colleague, Dr. Nadra Shalhoub-Kevorkian, has written a whole book on this. It's called Unchilding, where she maps the IDF intentional targeting of children over 7 decades. So I think I'll pause there. Happy to answer questions about social work if people want later on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you uplifting like Palestinian resistance, and Suhad, I think is how you said it, but like, right, I just want to appreciate you for bringing that into the space. Zack, could you talk to us a little bit about the role of United States social workers, and in particular, the unique role of anti-Zionist Jewish social workers in this conversation we're having?
Sure, I'd love to. First, I'd like to thank you for being a moderator. Thank the fellow panelists. I'm honored and privileged to get to learn from your expertise and wisdom. And I also want to thank everyone for joining. So many people are here because they understand how important this is. So that brings me hope. I'm going to break this into 2 parts. So the first part is social workers, right? What is our role here? I was originally drawn to Liberation Health because I believe very strongly that social work should be called to do work outside of our own individual client work. I think we need to be intervening on systems that we work in, and I think we should be intervening in the world. And I think that should be done with a social justice lens. I think that that's just something that social work talks about a lot, but neglects. And Liberation Health, shout out to Don Belka Martinez and the other originators of the model and the other people who are helping to caretake and grow that model, really takes this seriously. I don't think that you can be healthy in an unhealthy world. And so there's a contradiction with clinical work, because we can't fix these things by talking one-on-one. We have to fix a lot more than that. And I think that's really true in this moment in particular. I think that social workers also have a lot of very important skills when it comes to organizing. Organizing is, a lot of it is making very meaningful, interrelated relationships with the people around you. The social workers have skills that we use in our profession all the time that are perfectly adaptable to this: emotional intelligence, empathy, and appreciation for the dynamics of oppression and working across difference that doesn't come from reading a book, but from real lived experience working with other people, having difficult conversations and honesty that lead to meaningful relationships. So who better to do that than us, right? And this movement needs these skills, right? So if you're sitting on the sideline, you're depriving the movement of these skills that you've built up. We also have experience taking care of one another. I don't think it helps to dwell too much on how painful this is, but it is extremely painful to watch the information coming through our smartphones. It's extremely painful to get this information. We should be aware. It's our responsibility to know what's going on, but it comes at a cost. That cost cannot be inaction. So we have experience taking care of each other. People in the movement need those skills. And I think that we should bring those to bear as well. We also know what it means to evaluate our work based on outcome. We live in a very individualist society. That individualism can manifest sometimes as a pressure to do things on your own or to worry about what your actions say about you. How do I understand myself in this moment? If you're wondering if you're doing enough, I will give you the answer. I'll save you some time. You're not doing enough. None of us are doing enough. That's not the point, though. If you find yourself feeling a lot of pressure to make a grand statement, to get yourself in big trouble in order to prove something to yourself or the people around you, I would say, wait a second, think about what's really at stake here. I think your job here is to move the needle. And to do that, you need to use those social work skills and be much more thoughtful about outcomes. Don't do anything on your own. Find allies, find people who agree with you, work together, make those relationships as multiracial as possible so you get multiple perspectives, and then act thinking about who is around me, who's winnable, make those relationships and build those relationships around who's winnable, where can I move the needle. That activating people who are on the sidelines or helping educate people who aren't sure, but are willing to be educated and open their eyes to what's really happening, that adds to a movement, and the size of that movement is going to be determinant here. Right? So every person you add in your personal political work and every person those people add is going to make a big difference. Speaking of the Jewish thing, briefly, I think it's important that the world sees Jews fighting very strongly to humanize people that we're supposed to be humanized. The narrative here is there's a zero-sum game where whatever Jews have, we have to take from Palestinians. Whatever Palestinians have, that must be taken from Jews. I think it's very important we undermine that message by getting involved and saying, no, that's not true. I don't believe that. These people are fellow human beings. My future in justice and peace is tied to theirs. I'm not going to accept anything less than full humanity for everyone around me. And it gives cover to charges of anti-Semitism when Jews are involved. But I think more importantly, it starts to build a coalition, a multiracial coalition, which I think is necessary to smash the apartheid state.
Thank you so much, Zach. So we are approaching 8 o'clock, so just to be mindful of time, what I'm going to do is offer up one question for the whole panel before we move into Q&A. So folks have been providing questions in the chat that I will be reading out to y'all. But one question we just want to put out there for any and all of you to respond to is about where do we go from here, right? So there are these calls for a ceasefire, and I forget who mentioned the day after, like what do we do after the ceasefire? And so, where do we go from here? What is your vision of peace and justice in Gaza and Palestine if a ceasefire is called by the US? So whoever would like to comment first.
Yeah, I can go, and I really want to thank both Zach and Stephanie. Stephanie, thank you very much for actually, I never thought about it, how you put it, that our sumud is a healthy attachment to the self. You really gave me hope. You made me tear up because like you, I also have, I refuse to believe that there's intergenerational trauma, because I'm born 67, so it's like, and especially now, like, we are safe. I can't help it. Like, I wake up every morning scared and I tell myself, but I'm still safe. I am here. They are over there. They're the one dying. So you saying it like this, that it's a healthy attachment to the self is something very beautiful. So thank you. It moved me deeply, and I don't cry easily. So I think, and also Zach, what you said about the importance of working in a community collectively, collaboratively, intersectionally, it is so important. And from my experience, at least now what I'm seeing on campuses, I am very much encouraged by what I see on campus, that there's a group of students, maybe because they were not traumatized like others, or I don't know what it is, they seem to have a good attachment to the self and to the other, and they're really, because they're young, they're eager to learn, but they're also very courageous in a way that I did not see it 20 years ago, or, So, but to this point, I think what we can do here in the US, I think you social workers need to reach out as much as possible, because the many kids also suffering right now here, because as we said, we're, you know, many Palestinians, many Muslims, many Jewish kids. I mean, there's work that you need to do with these kids and these people, emphasizing what was Zack saying, empathy, emotional intelligence. But practically, in terms of political work, definitely we have to push for the ceasefire, because unfortunately, from what I'm hearing, it doesn't seem that Israel wants to stop this anytime soon. And like, I was hoping still that, you know, by Thanksgiving, maybe they will stop, or the American will put pressure, but it does seem that we are going to see another month or two of worse hell. So we have to prepare ourselves for that. So we need to we need to push for ceasefire. I think, yeah, all of us, we contact our senators, our representative, call for ceasefire, but that's definite. But also what we need to do very much is reach out to everybody and say that there is a solution. Apartheid can be undone without negating the Israelis who are living on the land. That this land of Palestine, when people tell me it's complicated, I tell them it's not complicated. It's two people who want this land, who live on this land. There are 14 million people there. The land can take us all. Everybody can live there. To counter the Israeli narrative that this is about elimination of Israelis. No, it's not about elimination of Israelis. It's about living together in equality, how do we imagine a post-apartheid reality? And the more we explain this is apartheid, and decolonization does not mean the negation of the other, it means living with the other. That Palestine means inclusion, does not mean exclusion. Zionism means exclusion and elimination. And actually, you can also say what I always tell people, Zionism created the Israeli. Zionism is settler colonialism, but I can also understand that it is a haven for many people. This haven has to be for everybody. So if we emphasize these and reach out there, I think that's what's very important. And it's hard with various levels, but I think, yeah, my message would be ceasefire, apartheid, post-apartheid, everybody can live together in equality, and we can do that. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
I think the only thing I would add to that, and maybe it's not even adding, it's restating in another way what Dr. Farsakh just said, and that is that there cannot be peace until there is liberation. And I must say, I don't know, you know, if there are any folks in this room from the CSWE Leadership Roundtable, the different organizations that put out a statement most recently about Palestine, Israel, and this call for peace that had no mention of the violence of the occupation, of settler colonialism, of just the violence of Zionism in Israel. And I think any call for peace that does not also call for liberation is a statement that upholds the status quo. So as we think about what next, right? Obviously, ceasefire. People are dying of thirst. People are dying of hunger. There's no clean water. The amount of waterborne, illnesses right now is 1,000-fold what it already was. Right? There just needs to be survival supplies that come in. And at some point, right, there also needs to be an attention to the occupation. I think it's what Dr. Farsakh was saying about there has to be a diplomatic solution. I believe there's one. I think, we are going to die together or live together. And I believe we can live together. And I believe that most Palestinians feel that way, but not under the occupation and not under 75 years of a boot on their neck. I will say some of the things that I heard Dr. Youssef mentioning about, when the ceasefire comes and the day after and what next, was that any individuals or groups that go to Gaza, that go to go help, he said, go with a plan. Do not go expecting to ask Palestinians, what do you need us to do? Go with your plan. I thought that was so concrete. Houses need to be built, right? And it takes a couple years because of the siege and getting materials in. So houses need to be built. Children need to be able to laugh and play, he said. That is a key part of the what next with children who have been traumatized. That is, they need to laugh and they need to feel some joy in order to just connect with that sumud.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say that I believe in a one-state solution. I would be curious what the other panelists think. I think they probably agree. I think the land can contain everyone and be a haven for everyone. You all probably have heard that anti-Zionism conflated with anti-Semitism. I'm sure many of you are sick of it, just like I am. There's a reason that happens. It's largely a talking point that's pushed by people who have an agenda, right? So we can admit that. There's some people who are in good faith believe that, and the reason they do is they have been convinced that without a state in the world, Jews will be annihilated. That's based upon a history of trauma. The Zionist movement was very unpopular with Jews until after the Holocaust, so there's a clear connection there. My belief is that what is best for Jews around the world and in Israel is the same thing that's best for Palestine, which is a free Palestine. And I'm going to try and articulate this a little bit. I think it's not an unusual conclusion for oppressed people to come to, that they need to isolate themselves from every other ethnic group and have a place that's just for them. This is called nationalism. It's a conclusion a lot of people have come to. I'm an internationalist. I think that this is a mistake. And I think because Israel served powerful interests, British imperialist interests and US imperialist interests, we have a very informative and instructive example of what this looks like in practice. So we had over a year of protests in Israel about the decaying of democratic institutions by the right-wing government. I knew, and I was saying to people, I'm afraid of what this means for the Palestine genocide. There's going to be an uptick soon. And the reason I suspected that was this protest movement didn't include Palestinians. This is fighting with one hand tied behind your back. The Israelis have real grievances against the way they're treated by their government. They're exploited. They're not treated democratically. And this is going to get much worse. And until Israeli citizens, until Jewish citizens understand that fight is connected to the Palestinian fight, they will be fighting with one hand behind their back. So we have seen Netanyahu have all these political problems. He's having trouble staying in power. We get a ramp up of settlements in the West Bank. We have arming of settlers. We have the engineering of confrontations at mosques and so on. And then now we have a coalition government, right? The use of an external threat to Jewish life in Israel, manufacturing and maintaining this conflict, is how an extreme right wing stays in power. Otherwise, they'd never be able to justify themselves. And I believe, like, if there's going to be a single state, and I think there should be, a subject has to create that state. It's not going to be created by people wishing for it. It'll be a subject. And that subject, in my opinion, needs to be Jews and Palestinians working together, understanding that only they can do it by working in solidarity, and that this is what is best for everybody.
Thank you.
Can I say something to that? Because you touched a very important problem, and I think this also issue. The tragedy of the moment for Israel, and I'm talking here as Israelis and as Zionists, is that they had an option to create the two-state solution in 1993, 30 years ago. And Israel and the Israeli right destroyed it, destroyed a two-state solution. The two-state solution is dead. We don't have it anymore. And this is why everybody is so petrified, especially the Israeli, and the Israeli government is petrified. That they nail it today, took it in such extermination terms, is because they're petrified to the core. They killed the two-state solution. They thought they had the Palestinians under control because they fragmented them politically, geographically, above all politically, because we don't have any more a forum as Palestinians to talk together, to decide the polity, to come up with a new project. They thought they had it under control, and it blew in their face like never before. So now that we are in a one-state reality, and we've been always in a one-state reality, but particularly we are in an apartheid reality, the only solution becomes a one-state solution. This could be binational, confederal, federal, but whatever it is, and somebody in the chat, I think, said it, decolonization does not mean elimination of whoever is there. It means living with equality. And I think that's the juncture we are in. How do we also, as social workers, you as social worker, me as a political scientist, as a human being, how do we emphasize the humanity of both sides and emphasize that something, a structure can be oppressive, but the people are just human beings like everybody else. Everybody, the Israelis as Muslims, are scared. One is suffering much more than the other and being, attacked much more than the other. But the fundamental question is our humanity and our equality. And that's what we need to emphasize. And to the social, somebody was asking Cindy Kwan about like, how do I deal with this with a Zionist? If I have a Zionist and had people lost in Israel, how do I relate to them? Okay. You relate to them as human being, if I can say that. Yeah, you empathize their suffering. I mean, I can't tell you your work. I mean, it's your work, but I think it is a big challenge, but also it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to try and bring forward that we are all human beings just wanting to be safe and happy and fulfilled and not all the time haunted by war.
Thank you for adding on to what Zack was mentioning. Dr. Farsakh, I'm actually going to ask you a question. It came up in the chat. This person says, I've seen posts where people say Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005. And they say usually it's framed in a way to minimize Palestinian suffering. Can you expand on what the actual truth is behind the statement?
Okay, thank you very much, because also Israel now says it will go and control Gaza again. Okay, Israel controlled always Gaza. What Netanyahu is doing is nothing new. In that he wants to come and stay there for another 10 years. He's been there. The Israeli government, what it did redeployment. What does redeployment mean? It means it will not have settlers in the Gaza Strip. It will not have troops inside the Gaza Strip, but it has troops outside the Gaza Strip. According to international law, Israel is still occupying the Gaza Strip. It did not absolve its responsibility from the Gaza Strip. And right now, what Israel is doing is shifting its type of control. Between 2005 and 2023, its military rule was based on just controlling the borders of Gaza. Right now, it's military control and wanting to contain Hamas, happy that Hamas is controlling the population because Israel does not want to pay money to have a civil administration and have Israeli posted in Gaza to risk being killed in Gaza, right? It's costly. That was what the occupation was about. What Israel did with the Oslo peace process is subcontract the occupation to Palestinians. Told the Palestinian, you manage your own self. The Palestinians accepted because they said, it's better we have something than nothing at all. And hoping that the international community will support them, meaning the US. This did not happen. So the Palestinians, what they have on their side is that nobody can blame them. They did not try. They tried the two-state solution. They tried completely capitulating for Israel. It still did not work. So Israel, before 2005, all what it did in 2005 is move its troops from inside the Gaza Strip to around the Gaza Strip. Right now, what it's doing is putting back its troop in the Gaza Strip with something new, because Israel this time is definitely adamant on eliminating North Gaza, okay, which means that they might stay longer, I don't know, but the message is again the same. They want the land without the people. The problem is they cannot have the land without the people. And they're trying to square it in all ways. But to your question, no, Israel has always been in control because Israel is an occupier by international law. And Israel did not say, okay, we build this big wall and whatever happens on the other side of the wall, I don't care about.
Thank you. I'm also seeing a couple of questions, both in the chat popping up now, but also what I was given about a desire to hear more about the global to local connections, in particular around militarism, imperialism, and state violence, right? Like in the United States, right, we have people who are manufacturing weapons that are used overseas. And if anyone could speak to like how you're thinking about those local, whether it's, here in Boston or elsewhere, to those global connections.
I'll say just a couple of things. I mean, I think there's just so much to be said about this. And I really just want to amplify some of the work that the abolitionists, some of them that I know are in this space, abolition, not just social workers, but abolitionists have been doing is making the connections between securitization, militarization, carcerality, between the local here in the US and Israel. I know some people may know this, but many of the police forces and law enforcement in the United States are trained by Israel's soldiers, by their surveillance and security systems. There is I can't remember the statistics, but I just heard it the other day. The incredible financial boom that the US has seen around the military industrial complex just since October. So that's one of the connections. There are others. I'm sure Leila can speak to some, and maybe Zack.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about geopolitics a little bit. I think that if you're a millennial, you're not surprised to learn that the United States has some significant economic problems, and those have not been solved, and they'll continue to get worse. For a long time, the United States dominated the world by controlling the world's oil supply, making sure that all oil in the world was traded in U.S. dollars, and there was really no other rival to sort of challenge that supremacy. Now we're seeing the United States have significant problems and China rising as an alternative for many places. So recently it was revealed by first the Wall Street Journal and then the New York Times that the United States is offering a mutual security pact with Saudi Arabia. This essentially means that the United States military would be on the hook for maintaining the Saudi ruling family's control over Saudi Arabia. The reason this is happening is what used to be taken for granted, which is that the United States would see most of the benefits from oil in the Middle East. The Saudis are saying we have other options. There's BRICS, which is a coalition of other governments, and then there's a bloc building around China. And the hope is to bring Saudi Arabia into an alliance with Israel, which would allow it to sort of serve as a bolster of the U.S. as it sort of, I think, preparing for war with China to prevent it from being the supreme. So this context is absolutely critical because you think, what does it mean now that there's a catastrophic genocide happening in Gaza? The entire Muslim world is watching this happen. It's very, very hard for Saudi Arabia now to recognize Israel as a state and to pretend everything is hunky-dory. And this is a big problem for the United States. So I think what you'll see is more and more of the United States being stuck between a rock and a hard place, giving away things it would rather not in order to maintain supremacy.
Thank you. I want to try to squeeze in one more question. So we got in the registration and also tonight a couple of questions about the Academy. I'm going to try to put this as neatly as possible. People are looking kind of for guidance around how to provide a response to folks in power, whether those are your professors or supervisors, about speaking up, because as we've seen in the Academy, there's either been silence, but there's also been recent kind of retaliation towards those who do speak up. And so I think the essence of what I'm hearing is kind of like, how are folks navigating the Academy in this moment?
This is a very good question and a very important question. And I will answer as somebody, how shall I put it? Of course, because of what I just explained, how Israel is finding itself, the state of Israel is finding itself in an existential war like never before. This is why it's retaliating so badly. And because I do believe that people have seen over the past 30 years, have heard the Palestinian narrative. For somebody, I come here 20 years ago, and I've seen the shift. 20 years ago, I was still not recognized, not seen. I had to be validated by somebody else. Today, I see that the Palestinian narrative and the Palestinian story is known towards more and more people. More people know of it. And also the pictures say who is being oppressed and who is being the oppressor or that. So I think there's a big backlash. There's an anger in certain circles at how much the Palestinian narrative has made headway in various circles, especially in the young generation. And there's a big backlash with the whole accusation that Zack mentioned of anti-Semitism and all these. And the universities are in the middle of it, because also within the universities, there are many more professors who are Palestinians or are, people who have worked on Palestine. The Palestinian history and facts has been much more exposed, and they feel a loss of power. So this is why the attack is very strong. But I also think this is why the time for action is very important. So I've learned that, when people are scared, as you say, you're in therapy, you have 3 reactions, right? It's either freeze, flee, or fight. Okay. I tend to fight. But in my family, we have the 3 actions. I have those who don't fight, those who flee, those who freeze. But if there's one thing I've learned, and that's, again, also in therapy, you say that the lean in thing, or, what do you call it? The exposure therapy, right? You call it exposure therapy. The best way to deal with fear is to face fear, not to run away from fear. So that's what we need to do. We need to help students to face their fear and empower them. And also we have to push back. You'll be amazed if you push back in a principled way. The more of us push back and appreciate the other's fear. That's what I always say. The other side is very scared. As long as we acknowledge their fear and push back and say, this is about our liberation, all of us, as very beautifully Stephanie mentioned it. The liberation of all of us, which stands that we stay principled in our fight for justice and liberation for all. So it is scary, but students need to know they're not alone. Faculty are also not alone. And the more we're connected together, the more we make alliances across the board. And also, the more we accept that we need to talk about difficult subjects, from anti-Semitism to Islamophobia to inequality to the more stronger we become, because we're standing on principled values of, as you say, you're a liberation health collective, is that the humanity and equality of everybody.
I'll add just 2 things. I posted in the chat a statement that the American Association of Professors put out just a couple of days ago about the ways in which, like, Palestine, speaking out with around Palestine solidarity requires protection. And it's really a statement, I think, around academic freedom. So for academic environments, and in my rating of it, states pretty clearly that Palestine solidarity work is part of the robust kind of academic discourse. And I feel like in some places that might offer a little bit of protection. I know at my university, there's been a lot of conversations in a lot of different spaces about, might the faculty senate make a statement, or the president? So having the union say something is really helpful. My piece of advice for any folks here in academic settings who are wanting to speak out, who are wanting to engage in action, is simply to look for others. Don't do anything alone. Consult with others. If you do decide to engage in action, do it with many heads and many people thinking about care and accountability and safety. And I just encourage folks not to do things on their own. Just do it in a collective, do it with others.
I agree. I'm going to name capitalism here. It's largely a question of power. Liberal institutions like NGOs and universities, they serve capital because they're controlled and funded by capital. That's what they're there for. In normal times, the liberal capitalists rule with deception plus force. They use deception first. They're not willing to use force in Black communities, mass incarceration, etc. But they prefer deception. As things start to unravel and as people start to actually understand what's happening, they're going to switch more to force. So you're going to see people we're not going to tell you why it's okay that you're getting dragged off campus for saying free Palestine. We're just going to start doing that. And so people need to be careful and take it seriously. It's not a game. I would say that if you're frustrated with your institution, that probably the best thing you could do in many cases is to reveal who they're really working for and what those politics signal, why they're silent in this moment. I think the most important thing people need to be doing is winning the people around them to organizations which are not controlled by the capitalists. Win them to Liberation Health, I'm a member of. It's not controlled by capitalists. We don't have any money. We don't take money from anybody. There's lots of socialist, communist organizations, abolitionist organizations not controlled by the capitalists. win the people who feel similarly to those organizations. That's where you'll find allies and comrades who can speak loudly and boldly about these things and consider where it's dangerous. And this is not true for all NGOs, but for the most part, where it's dangerous, be careful and be thoughtful and be strategic about winning the people around you. Do what you can, be bold if it's going to make a big difference, but don't expect too much from them, is my answer.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all three of you all for coming tonight and sharing the insights that you have about this issue. We are forever thankful for you all's participation. And I know I learned a lot, and so I hope that others who joined tonight did as well. As we are beginning to near the end of our time together, just want to go over a few things for folks. So one, we have a resource guide that includes ways to participate in calls for ceasefire, as well as there are organizations on the list, as well as readings and resources from our panelists that you all can continue to engage with. I have also seen a bunch of comments about the recording. We will follow up with you all after tonight about next steps regarding it, so do not worry about that. We also want to amplify and kind of name, again, strategies that people in schools of social work are currently engaging in. So as I mentioned, maybe not to you all, maybe I'm thinking about a pre-conversation, but if people are not aware, Columbia University School of Social Work students led a sit-in, I believe it was the beginning of this week, and they were making a pressure, it was a pressure campaign, right, for their dean to participate in a call for ceasefire along with other demands. Those students, like other students, are being retaliated against, and so we wanted to reach out to share with them about the social work specific space we were holding tonight, but also to see if there was any resources that they wanted us to share on their behalf. And they are currently doing a fundraiser for students that participated in the sit-in. So if you are able to and interested, that is the fundraiser from the students at the Columbia University School of Social Work who did the sit-in. We also want to, with people's consent, as much as possible on Zoom, take a photo of us. So at the end of all Boston Liberation Health meetings, typically there is a photo taken on Zoom with people in their Zoom squares just to commemorate the time together. If you're not comfortable with doing that, just like how I said it for the recording, you can please turn off your camera. For those of you who are okay, we will, let me unpin. Yes, let me unpin folks. But we will have one of our members take a photo. So smile, you can put your fist up if you want to in solidarity. Whatever feels in this moment, good. Good, okay, great, I have the sign. Thank you all. Also, did I put the resource list in? Hold on, if I did not. Let's see. This is the resource list I mentioned, if I did not post it earlier. There are a ton of resources out there in addition to this resource list, so please also seek out other information, and we do hope that there will be other teach-ins that follow this. Also want to plug, since Dr. Wahab is here, there is the Social Workers for Palestine group, so there is a listserv that has additional information that has been going out into the world. So there are other people holding spaces and sharing resources, and so this is not the only place that you can get that information. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming again tonight. We will hear more from us via email. And again, we hope that you learned a little more tonight. So have a great evening and be well.